Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Ukraine liberating Kupiansk became the biggest success of Ukrainian armed forces in a sense of counter-attacking towards the Russians in the 2025. So now let's look at the situation at the front line, what Russia wants to achieve, what it can achieve, and what it cannot. If you want to know about political implications, what the liberation of Kupiansk means for Ukraine, you can watch the video yesterday. Today we're going to be looking at the situation at the front line specifically. With Ukraine liberating Kupiansk, now the situation is pretty bad for Russians. Let's tell it how it is. Russia, in Kupiansk area specifically, they wanted to achieve many good things. They wanted to cross this river so they don't have to walk past the stronghold on Sivkivka, and they really wanted to kind of take over Kupiansk, and I should use the red one here. So they really wanted to try to take over Kupiansk, and then from there move in to clear out all of the Ukrainian positions on this eastern side of the Oskil River. That was the initial plan, and especially they wanted to retake Kupiansk because it's a major logistics hub, as well as the city right to the south of it, Kupiansk-Vyzlovy, that is a major railway hub that if Russia takes over this whole area, would really help them with securing logistics and just generally be an extremely helpful position to have. Yet now this whole northern offensive is pretty much useless. There is, of course, the discussion about North Kharkiv region, this area specifically. The problem of this area, there is not much here. So what's the actual point? Russia can, of course, capture it for the sake of capturing land, so they can show in the propaganda medias that no, we can now control even more settlements with unknown names, or the names like Ivanivka number 743, but it still doesn't really bring those political benefits to Russia that it needs. And Russia needs political benefits for one very specific reasons. Because if we zoom out and try to figure out, well, what does Russia really want? Like how much Russian military successes are advancing it towards its ultimate goal. Russian ultimate goal is to capture the territory of Ukraine. We know that. So if we specifically look into the prism of military capturing of the land, then we can clearly see that for Russia potentially to capture the whole of Ukraine, that would be a challenge. So the project minimum for Russia would be capturing Kyiv. Russia cannot really attack from the north. It's a very, very unfavorable position for them. They already tried it. It was really bad. So the only reasonable way they can do it is sort of a move across move along the Dnipro River on the side and try to kind of clear out this whole area from there, and maybe then supplement it with an attack from the north when this whole area towards the southeast of Kyiv would be captured by Russians. The problem is that it's pretty far away. Like it's a long way ahead. Russia, even with their major quote-unquote advances as portrayed by a lot of media, still doesn't really achieve. The same northern region, remember that we talked about for Russia that it could capture potentially even without going for Kupiansk, is just this small square right over here. It doesn't really get Russia that close to Kyiv. Like, just look at the size of it. Ukraine is huge, and Russia is not having the military potential. So expecting that Russia will get to Kyiv, that really doesn't really get it anywhere. So then we would say, okay, let's see what Russia can do. Russia right now has a window of opportunity because of the political thing, so they would probably want to play around these sensitive topics, so to say, around what is there known in the public and the allies of Ukraine to try to persuade them to stop supporting Ukraine. And the most clear objectives that Russia could get potentially is the city of Zaporizhia, it is potentially city of Dnipro, city of Kharkiv, and then Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and the Donbass area. Now, for a lot of reasons, I would say Kharkiv, Dnipro, Zaporizhia is completely out of the question. Those are huge cities. Nothing that Russia even close have come to capturing. Even the Pokrovsk, Mirnograd agglomeration that Russia has been struggling for over a year is just a fracture of even one of these cities' districts. So I would say big cities, is not something that Russia can achieve in a close enough future. So the only notable objective that Russia can go for is capturing Donbass. So if we can assume that this is the targeted objective, then working towards capturing some unknown settlements in the northern part of Kharkiv region here, that just doesn't make sense. Capturing Kupiansk could be relevant because, technically speaking, if Russia would be able to then advance further, they would be able have the ability to undercut Ukrainian supplies towards this Donbass agglomeration and additionally attack and put pressure and create a more devastating situation for Ukrainians here in Donbass. Yet we see Kupiansk resisting very successfully and now being completely retaken by Ukrainians. So now all of the control that Russia has on the west side of the river, Oskil, is pretty, I don't want to say useless because it is still a bridgehead, but basically they're at square one. All of the operations that they did over the 2025 were just reduced to nothing. So at this moment, I'm very glad to say that Kupiansk direction is pretty dead for Russia for the foreseeable future, which is great to hear. So therefore, we can zoom in on the actual goals that Russia wants to achieve militarily. This is Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, Drushkivka agglomeration. This is a huge agglomeration of urban settlements that are close together, and they're creating this change of fortress cities. Russia, again, never even closely fought anything like this, and it's going to be a major challenge for Russia. So to reach to this agglomeration, Russia has certain things that it needs to achieve. There are specific, so to say, gateway cities for Russia to conquer. First one is north is Liman. Then there is towards the east is Siversk. Then there is Konstantinivka, which is towards the southeast. And there is also Dobropilya, this one area right north to Mirnograd and Pokrovsk agglomeration. So roughly speaking, Russia would want to attack from this area, this area, this area, and this area. There is also around Chasiv Yar, which is located right over here, where Russia really struggles to advance, but it's an extremely unfavorable direction for Russia. They would prefer not to advance because despite the fact that Russia supposedly here is the closest towards the Kramatorsk Sloviansk, it's actually a pretty much uphill battle for them through the very unfavorable terrain from the positions that they have at Chasiv Yar. So instead, they would obviously prefer to kind of get something from the north, collapse something more from the side, and maybe kind of supplement it with taking over the Siversk pocket so they have a more unified front line. Therefore, let's look at each of these key cities and what's the situation right over there. Around Liman, here Ukraine had a very difficult position when Russians were advancing. And specifically, Ukrainians were not able to hold really Yampil, and Russians were able to advance towards the outskirts of Liman from the eastern side. Additionally, Russians also had success north of Liman, right over there. However, since then, Ukrainians were able to a little bit stabilize the situation. And while there are still some advances, they are extremely slow. And in the same way, attack from the northeastern part through Stavki also didn't really succeed for Russians. So for now, while Russians can reach with some of the forward-facing groups, some of the outskirts of Liman, they're pretty far away from threatening the city in any notable way. Especially because there is a big Ukrainian forces that are still preventing Russians to move from the eastern side directly because they're protected by this Siversk pocket. That's why Russia would like to see this Siversk pocket collapsing. The bad news for Russia, however, that Ukrainian success on Kupiansk direction will allow them to transition potentially into more defensive position without the need for so much counterattacking, and will allow them to redeploy some of the resources towards Liman direction. I specifically talk about Liman direction because this direction as well is covered by the General Drapati, who has been instrumental in retaking Kupiansk. Therefore, with additional reinforcements on the Liman sector, I can foresee Russia having more challenges here than it could expect. Siversk direction is a bit of a problem for Ukrainians. This has been a very big stronghold for Ukrainians because of the logistics and geography in the area. Right now, the biggest question, as I explained many times, is whether or not Russians will be able to cross this river that kind of cuts the city in two. And right now, the reports are that Russia is in control of the eastern part, but there are no solid reports that Russia was able to cross the river and establish themselves properly on the western side of the river. This will still be a challenge for Russia. My hopes is that it will still continue supporting Ukraine, and it will still allow them to prevent Russia advancing further fast enough. But generally speaking, Liman pocket itself is also, I have the topography map enabled here, and you can see a lot of these crevices right over here. So the landscape here is pretty mountainous, and it's a very hard landscape for Russians to easily advance through. So it's not going to be an easy job for them to just close this pocket, despite the fact even if they capture Siversk altogether. It's not an easy job. We talked already about Chasiv Yar. Around Konstantinivka. Konstantinivka is definitely right now becoming a frontline city, and there are some fighting happening on the outskirts, on the southeast of the city. However, besides that, Konstantinivka is not yet threatened. Russians have not been really able to advance from Chasiv Yar. They were able to advance a little bit around the Dobropilya direction, but the problem of Russian advancing specifically on the Dobropilya direction, which is located right over here, is that they are a little bit preoccupied as they need to dedicate most of their forces to fight for Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. And that means that they cannot advance fast enough for their desired goals to be achieved. So therefore, zooming into Pokrovsk, Mirnograd, right now, obviously, everyone is discussing the encirclement of Pokrovsk, and it's not really encirclement because gray area is not the same as Russia captured area. And beyond that, there are news that Ukrainians are actually, they're doing pretty well despite the difficulties of that direction. Russia has concentrated a lot of resources. Syrskyi and the general staff are reporting that they were able to fight back and retake some 16 square kilometers in the north of Pokrovsk. Most likely, we're talking about specifically this northern area, which essentially tells me that no, Ukrainians are not in control of this area. But yes, that there is some kind of logistic corridors that are established between Ukrainian mainland controlled territory and even Mirnograd area as well. Though I need to say that in the recent couple of days, we have been seeing reports of Russians entering Mirnograd, which kind of underscores to me that Ukrainians are getting the orders to potentially withdraw to a more favorable positions in Mirnograd. I do not expect this agglomeration to be captured before the end of the year, but generally speaking, I would not be surprised that Russia will continue advancing. The amount of resources Russia is dedicating here is enormous, and Ukraine is picking and choosing their battles. That is why recapturing of Kupansk is so important. I would like to see more of this, because it's not crazy for me to imagine that Russia will advance in their main direction of attack. Like, think about this way. Russia has more resources. We all kind of know that. So if they put their resources somewhere, then most likely they're going to start advancing there. The question is whether they all can also advance on their secondary directions, such as Kupansk. And the fact that there was a counterattack on Kupansk and all of the Russian successes have been erased, that tells me that no, Ukrainians are still, despite the lack of resources, have the fighting potential, even if Russia is advancing at some of the priority directions. Slowly, very, very slowly. It's the key word here. So to sum up what we understood today, Russia's ultimate goal that they would want to achieve is capture Kyiv, and it seems that the hell will freeze over faster than Russia will reach Kyiv in any foreseeable future. Beyond that, Russia would really want to capture some of the notable cities, yet they are not even closely there. The only thing that they're trying to play for is the Donbass region, and that's why they're using a lot of that political rhetoric. It doesn't get them closer to achieving their ultimate goal, the strategic goal, erasure of Ukraine, but it does get them closer with the people that are telling that there is no way that Russia can lose, that it's impossible for Russia to actually be stopped, that we should potentially take all of the sanctions off of Russia. And you know who I'm talking about, right? We've talked about this extensively, and today we're not focusing on this. And that's why they are, in their propaganda, are emphasizing that, yes, Donbass is such a big and important target. And if Donbass falls, then everything falls, then Ukraine is done for. Obviously, it's not. But the point of the matter is, even in Donbass area, the Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Drushkivka still is not even close within the Russian reach. Even the key cities that I've stated out here that Russia must capture to even approach this big target are still not even in sight. And Russia barely maybe is somewhere on the ultimate outskirts of these cities. It's going to take Russia immense amounts of effort, a lot of dead Russians to try to reach this agglomeration. So I would say there is no need for Ukraine to surrender. There is no need for Ukrainian allies to start tearing out their hairs, expecting that Ukraine will collapse. What is needed is just more constant support and more trust in the capabilities of Ukrainian armed forces. If anything, just with recent retaking of Kupansk, they showed us that this is indeed the case and they can do it really nicely. Specifically, if we're talking about Pokrovsk, I cannot show you the latest videos. Guys, go on our Discord. We have the Not Safe for Work channel there where we can post all of the combat footage, but it is pretty brutal. So if you don't believe me, like if you think like, okay, you're telling words, but does it have anything substantial behind it? Go into our Discord and you will see every single one of these videos of Russian just being absolutely demolished and burned down as they're trying to approach the northern side of Pokrovsk. It looks pretty terrible for Russians. Additionally, good news are coming in for Ukrainian armed forces. Syrsky and the command staff of Ukraine have announced that the rotation of brigades have begun. This is obviously a danger. There is always Russians that can exploit rotation within and with brigades, and this is going to be a big issue for Ukrainians, and hopefully they have learned how to do rotation of brigades better so we don't see any Russian breakthroughs that happened around Avdiivka earlier this year. In any case, guys, the best thing we can all do to support Ukraine is participate in fundraiser. Let's get some drones. Christmas is coming, so let's get our presents for Ukrainian armed forces. I love you. Trust in Ukraine, support Ukrainian armed forces. Slava Ukraini, and I will see you next time.